great unknown. Leave your worries and your suitcase. All you don't need, nothing but you. So don't throw your hopes down a wishing well.
All right, well, we have left Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we are making our way down Route 66. And in the last episode, we were looking at some of the petroglyphs just on the outskirts of Albuquerque, and talked a little bit about how all throughout human history, people have had this natural inclination to worship something. So for the Pueblo and their ancestors, well, their expression of worship came in the form of these petroglyphs. They're in the rocks just outside of Albuquerque. Now, when the Spanish ended up moving into this area, well, they brought with them their faith. And this church right here, which is the San Jose de Laguna Church, I think it's what it's called. This was one of the early churches that the Spanish built. It was built between 1699 and 1701. So this is the San Jose de Laguna Mission Church. I think I missed the mission part just a moment ago. This church was dedicated to Saint Joseph, and as I mentioned earlier, or just a moment ago, construction started on it in 1699 as the Spanish were moving through this area and looking to set up a mission for the local Pueblo population that was already here. And the style is a little bit different from other Spanish churches of that era. This is in the early Pueblo style of architecture. So unlike other missions from the same period, it's constructed from fieldstone and adobe and mortar and plaster. And the inside is 105 feet by 22 feet. So we may go inside and take a quick look if the door is open. Okay. Quick update. I went inside the church. It is quite beautiful, and there are also signs everywhere saying, in no uncertain terms, strictly no photography or videography. So I want to be respectful of that. But they also have some postcards in there that you can get, 2 for $1. So I went ahead and picked up a few postcards. And this one right here shows what the inside of the church is like. So you can see they've got some beautiful murals in there. And then here is a picture of the altar up front. So yeah, really amazing. But anyway, quick stop to show you one of the early Spanish churches here in New Mexico. All right, hey, I'm going to let you pick the music for this next leg. What do you want to listen to?
Taylor Swift.
Nope, wrong answer.
No.
All right, quick stop to get some fuel. And while we are here, we are at, I don't know, I guess it's maybe kind of a landmark location. But this is the Continental Divide. So from this point, exactly right here, any drop of rain that falls is going to be headed towards the Atlantic Ocean. And from right here, it's all going to be headed towards the Pacific Ocean, just like us. All right, we have moved into Arizona now on our journey along Route 66. And even though I'm not a hot weather guy. I prefer the cold. I am loving this part of the country with the desert and everything. It's simultaneously beautiful but harsh and unforgiving, and I am really enjoying this. And travelers along Route 66, well, when they got into Arizona, one of the attractions that they would have stopped at, especially during the tourist era of the late 40s and 50s and 60s, was the Petrified Forest, which is where we are right now. And believe it or not, I'm actually standing on Route 66. If you see all of these telephone poles here in the background that have no lines attached to them, those ran parallel to the route, but obviously the route is no longer here. But they have some pretty cool things here that kind of show us what it used to look like. Looking out across this area, I mean, it seems pretty desolate, and you would never know that there was anything going on here. But this used to be the hub of activity here along Route 66. So in the 1920s, there was a little park here, or a little like roadside zoo, which is kind of wild to think about. In the 1950s, they also had a little tower here called the Painted Desert Tower that was demolished in 1958. And something else that is really kind of interesting that they have is, imagine it's the 1930s and you are trying to escape the ravages of the Dust Bowl, and you are making your way to California in an old 1932 Studebaker. So yeah, it's really kind of cool that even though the road is gone and the roadside attractions are gone, they put this relic here to remind us that there used to be a lot of people traveling this road all throughout the 20th century. Yeah, that is really something else. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I'm not a car guy, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is no longer roadworthy. All right, we're going to take a little bit of time and look at some of the attractions here in the Petrified Forest that people would have looked at, you know, all throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. A lot of our focus on this trip has been on the era of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. But as you're traveling through this area, keep in mind that there were people in these areas long before the travelers came through on Route 66. And here in the Petrified Forest, well, you can see some evidence of that, like here in this old Pueblo village. We've got a little bit of a rain situation going on in the desert today. It keeps raining off and on, which is okay. It's kind of keeping it cool. But the area that we are standing in right now, between the years of around 1250 to 1380, was the Puerco Pueblo. So this is where the Pueblo people lived in this area, and there was quite the community. What we are looking at right now is something called a kiva. This was something that was built like for religious ceremonies or for religious reasons. And we're going to go ahead and just walk on up this way. But here on this little hilltop, well, there would have been kind of like an apartment complex of sorts that had like one-story apartments of about 100 rooms. And as we walk up here, well, you can kind of see the outline of some of the structures in this village. Yeah, very fascinating. Here's something kind of interesting here at this village. If you look at this boulder in front of us, you see this split right in the middle of it. Well, it's quite possible that this boulder was used as a summer solstice marker. So summer solstice, longest day of the year, when the sun would shine through that crack. Well, it could be marked on this other boulder right in front of it. And if you'll notice, there are a few petroglyphs on there. So I'm seeing a footprint, and then off to the left there's a little spiral marker. So that's right about where the light would hit, shining through the split in the boulder. And there are a few other little petroglyphs that I'm seeing. We might see a few more here by the time we're done. But it's not for sure, but it's possible that this was used to mark the summer solstice. What we are looking at here is the plaza area of Puerco Pueblo. And here you can see all of these little individualized rooms. So this was a thriving community. The guess is probably about 200 people were here. And this was not a village that was just isolated from the rest of the world. We're close to a couple of rivers. There's the Rio Puerco. There's also the Little Colorado River. Well, as with in other places around the world throughout history, rivers are kind of a highway or a route of trade. So there would have been a lot of trade and interaction with other communities that the people of this community had with other places along the rivers. There's evidence of that from the pottery that has been excavated from this site. There's some pottery that is kind of native to this area, and then there's some stuff that's been excavated that is more common in other areas. Yeah, this is really fascinating. In the last episode, we were looking at petroglyphs of the Pueblo people and their ancestors in New Mexico. Well, here in this village, as you might imagine, we also have some petroglyphs, some evidence that the people left behind of their existence here. So here you can see some etchings on this boulder in front of us. And then on this one, there are some that really stand out well. Probably the most prominent is this bird in the middle, likely a white-faced ibis, and it appears to be holding a frog in its beak. And there you can see like water droplets below it. And then there are others, like a face down there. There's some zigzag patterns. Again, some of this is a mystery as to what exactly they are. So maybe some of them represent gods, or maybe some of them represent villagers. It's kind of difficult to say, but all of it represents people who once lived here, which is pretty interesting. All right, let's go look at some petrified wood. All right, we've moved to an area now where we have some of these petrified logs. And this is actually going to be my first time ever seeing any of this. And this is really, really fascinating. All right, so let's have a quick science lesson here. Here's how a log or a tree becomes petrified. So at one point, this tree that we are looking at right now was at the edge of a stream. And the tree died, lost its leaves, branches, bark, all that kind of stuff. And then the river undercut this tree and it toppled into the river. Well, when that happened, it got transported downstream and then got caught along the bank, where it got buried underneath sand and mud in the stream channel. Now, when that happened, it cut it off from any oxygen and bacteria, so this thing didn't decay and rot like what a normal log would. Well, while underneath that mud and silt and whatnot, well, what ended up happening after that was silica from the groundwater got into the tree and replaced the organic material with quartz crystals, and then the log became petrified. So if we look right here, you can kind of see some of that quartz there. And these have like all kinds of interesting patterns and colors and whatnot. Well, after a period of time, erosion from the surrounding rock layers would re-expose this petrified log, and it would crack and break into segments and then eventually roll down the hill. And now we have this petrified log, which is like a fossilized tree or a mineralized tree. Yeah, very fascinating. We've just walked up to an area that is called Jasper Forest. And here, this was kind of the site that a lot of people first came to when they came to the Petrified Forest. So here's a picture of naturalist John Muir. This picture was taken in 1905 and then has been superimposed on some modern day images. Here's an image from 1883 and then a similar image from 2013. And when I walked up here myself and just came up to the edge, the first words out of my mouth were, wow. So what you're looking at down here is one of the highest concentrations of petrified wood in the world. I mean, this is really, really incredible. Definitely a unique site, and I can see why John Muir and other people throughout American history were so impressed when they came to this site. As a matter of fact, one man by the name of Horace Howard Furness in 1906 said, "I hardly dare write the words, but truthfulness compels me to say that in the Petrified Forest, the Grand Canyon, on the score of interest, has a rival." Right now, as far as petrified trees, this is the big daddy right here. This is called the Agate Bridge, and it is 110 feet long. And what really makes this impressive, obviously, is the fact that it is unbroken. So at some point, this tree died and fell and washed down to this point and went through the process that I described earlier and became mineralized, and then erosion washed out the soil and everything from underneath it, and it formed this little bridge. Now you can see there's this concrete support below it, designed to try and keep this thing intact. That was built in 1917. But yeah, that's really impressive. Here's another interesting petrified tree here in the Petrified Forest. This one is called Old Faithful, and this thing is massive. And what's really kind of unique about this one is that the tree roots were kind of preserved and fossilized as well. Hey, jump up there so we can get like a scale of how big this thing is. So there's my daughter. She's 5 foot, what? 5'2". 5'2". All right, so there's a 5'2.5" hobbit next to this petrified tree, so you can see just how big it is. We've moved over to an area where, again, it is just pack loaded with these fossilized trees. And there are a few examples here that really, really show this crystallization. And these things are absolutely stunning. So these are much better than the examples that we were looking at just a moment ago. And if we walk over here, you can see some more of these larger logs that became mineralized and became petrified. We'll take a look at one more right here. So it's pretty cool to think about all of not only the native peoples who were in this area and explored this part of the country and saw these petrified logs, but later the settlers and then later, like American tourists who were coming through here on vacation as they were traveling Old 66. Now let's say you were traveling through Arizona on Route 66 in the 1930s, maybe escaping the Dust Bowl. Or maybe you were traveling with your family on vacation in the late 40s or the 50s. Well, along Route 66 here in Arizona, one of the highlights would have been this place right here. This is the Painted Desert Inn, and it has a really, really fascinating story. I want to take a moment to talk about this place because it really factors into the history of Route 66. So this building was built in 1919 with Native American labor. Something that's interesting about this place is, I mean, if you look around, there's not a whole lot of lumber. There's not, a whole lot of building materials. So they used what they had, which was petrified wood and clay. We'll take a look in a moment at a part where you can actually see some of the petrified wood that this structure was built with. Now, originally, it was not called the Painted Desert Inn. 1924, a guy by the name of Herbert Lohr registered this place under the Homestead Act, and it was called the Stone Tree House. So this was an inn and a restaurant. It was very isolated. So there's no sewage or power lines that were connected here. All the water had to be hauled in from 8 miles away. Electricity had to be generated on site. But when Route 66 came through here, well, this became a stop for travelers along the route. Well, unfortunately, it was built on a faulty foundation and was having some problems. So Lohr and his family operated this place for about 10 years. And then when the Petrified Forest National Monument started buying up land around here, well, this was part of what they bought up. In 1936, they bought this place for $59,400. We've moved around to what is currently the back of this structure, but during its heyday, well, this set of double doors would have served as the main entrance into the Stone Tree House. And if you take a look, here's something that's really interesting to me, is you can see a bit of the building materials that are exposed here around this door, and you can see that it is petrified wood. There's a little bit more that is over here. Now, unfortunately, for Harvey Lohr, this whole structure was built on a faulty foundation and was having some problems. So after the National Park Service acquired this property, well, they brought in a guy by the name of Lyle Bennett, who was pretty well known for his Southwestern influences and his designs and things like that. And they started renovating the Stone Tree House and utilized labor from the Civilian Conservation Corps. So this was a government program from the 1930s that put young men to work on different, outdoor projects and things like that. So CCC labor served to renovate this place, and it opened back up on July of 1940 under the name of the Painted Desert Inn. So travelers could then come here and get a stop along their way as they were traveling Route 66 and maybe get some refreshments and then come out on this porch and enjoy this absolutely incredible view. Yeah, that is really something else. Now, unfortunately, the Painted Desert Inn's grand reopening was going to be short-lived. World War II was going to change everything, and in October of 1942, well, it was forced to close its doors. But once World War II was over, things started looking up again. It reopened in 1946, but again, there were problems with the foundation. The Fred Harvey Company, which was like a big, for lack of a better term, kind of like a hotel chain, if I'm getting this right, had acquired this property, and in the 1960s, it was almost looking like this thing wasn't going to survive, and there was talk about tearing it down, but it was such an iconic spot along Route 66 and such a popular place that there was a public outcry, and they ended up saving it. Now, this building no longer serves as an inn, but you can get ice cream here. And we'll dodge inside real quick and take a look at some of the interior. Right now I'm standing in what is currently a gift shop, but during the 1930s would have been the main lobby, which served as a little trading post. So there would have been all kinds of things that the travelers could buy and purchase here in this room. Something that is kind of interesting is during the remodel in the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps came in here, well, if you see these glass tiles on the roof, well, these are pieces that gifted artists painted and included into this structure, which is really, really fascinating. You see the woodwork on the ceiling. Yeah, but anyway, this would have been the main lobby. I'm going to attempt to give a quick walkthrough through the remaining portion of the Painted Desert Inn here. You can imagine it being, in the 1930s or 1940s, and you're traveling through the hot Arizona desert, maybe in July or something like that, and your vehicle doesn't have air conditioning, of course. Well, you might want to stop and get some refreshments, maybe a cold soda or an ice cream or something like that. Well, here at the Painted Desert Inn, well, here is where you would come and order your refreshments, and then maybe have a seat here in one of these booths and cool off and enjoy what it was that you ordered. These are all original to the redesign during the 1930s. Men of the Civilian Conservation Corps actually built these booths, so that's really neat that they have these. And I mentioned Fred Harvey. So Fred Harvey was in the hospitality industry in the late 1800s. His company continued through the early 1900s, and he had these women who worked here called Harvey girls. So here's a picture of some of the Harvey girls who would have served the customers here. They had pretty high standard, for how they, treated customers and things like that. Had to have at least an 8th grade education. They had to be neat and articulate and have good manners. But anyway, this is where some of the refreshments would have been served. And again, let's just do a quick walk through here. Back here, we are moving into the kitchen area. So here you can see some of the original fixtures from the redesign. So this is where all of the food and everything would have been prepared. And something else that's kind of cool is on display. They have different items that have been found along Route 66. Things that were trash at the time that people just threw out, but now are kind of interesting little artifacts to us. Walking out of the kitchen, originally when this was the stone treehouse, this would have been a giant walk-in cooler that you would have moved into. But in the 1930s redesign, well, it became a dining room. And something that I really, really like about this, here we can see a picture from the 1940s, it looks like 1947. And you can see a lot of this kind of retains that old look. A lot of the furniture in here is original furniture, so they ask people not to sit on it, of course. This is all furniture that was made by skilled craftsmen in the Civilian Conservation Corps. So yeah, you can imagine travelers, all gathering in here and eating a meal or something like that. And they also have these really, really cool murals that point to the history and culture of this area. So this one is called Three Peaks and Corn Planting, and it's kind of hearkening to the planting cycle and related ceremonies. The peaks represent what are called the San Francisco Peaks, which are located near Flagstaff, Arizona. And over here is another mural that kind of points to the culture and traditions of the Pueblo and Hopi people. So this one is called the Salt Lake mural, and it depicts two young Hopi men who were on a salt gathering journey, who walked 230 miles from their home to get salt along the Zuni mesas, and had to pass through what is now the Petrified Forest, and became kind of like this coming of age story. And then here's a photo. I don't know if these are the men who were a part of this, or if these are just guys from the CCC or not. But anyway, yeah, really cool to walk through this place and kind of take a step back into history. All right, well, there you go. That was legitimately interesting, having this stop here today. And again, it's cool to think about how we're taking the same route that thousands and thousands of other people took during the 20s and the 30s and the 40s into the 50s, and stopped at places just like this. All right, we're going to continue on down the road, making our way through Arizona into California, headed towards our final destination of Santa Monica.